The community coming together yesterday for a candlelight vigil to remember Tyra Crosby. CMPD says Stephanie Alexander came home and killed Crosby. Her family tells WCNC Charlotte she was invited over by the husband.
The clock struck 5 in the morning when Stephanie Alexander turned her key in the front door of her Porter Street home. The house was quiet, too quiet. Something felt off as she moved through the familiar hallway. Perhaps it was intuition, or maybe she noticed subtle signs. Unfamiliar perfume lingering in the air, a jacket she didn't recognize draped over a chair. Whatever it was, it led her to her bedroom door. What she discovered next would forever alter multiple lives and rock the Charlotte community to its core. There, in her matrimonial bed, the same bed she had shared with her husband for years, lay 25-year-old Tyra Shanell Crosby alongside Stephanie's husband. In that moment, rage, betrayal, and primal instinct collided in 51-year-old Stephanie's mind. Within minutes, a young woman's life would be extinguished, a marriage shattered beyond repair, and a path to prison set in motion. On July 18, 2023, what began as a case of infidelity spiraled into a homicide that captivated Charlotte, North Carolina. The discovery of Tyra Crosby in the Alexander home triggered a sequence of events that would later be disputed from every angle. Initial reports suggested a straightforward case of a betrayed wife acting in the heat of passion, but evidence soon painted a more disturbing picture. An 8-minute voicemail, allegedly capturing Tyra's final moments, suggested something far more sinister than the spontaneous crime of passion. The recording, which Tyra's mother claimed contained sounds of her daughter being beaten and tortured, transformed public perception of the case. What's more, surveillance footage revealed that Tyra had been seen earlier with Stephanie's husband at an arcade on North Tryon Street, raising questions about whether she had been lured to the home under false pretenses rather than sneaking in as an intruder. Have you ever considered how you would react if faced with the ultimate betrayal? Where's the line between justifiable anger and criminal action? As we explore this tragic case, I want you to think about your own boundaries and what you would do to protect them. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Throughout this video, we'll dissect every aspect of this heartbreaking case, from the fateful meeting at the arcade to the surprising courtroom plea that changed everything. You'll hear about the crucial evidence that elevated charges from voluntary manslaughter to second-degree murder, and the family confrontation that erupted during sentencing. Beyond the case details, we'll explore vital safety lessons that could save lives. We'll examine red flags and potentially dangerous relationships, discuss strategies for protecting yourself when meeting new people, and highlight resources available for those trapped in volatile situations. Most importantly, we'll honor Tyra Crosby's memory by understanding how this tragedy could have been prevented. By the end of this video, you'll not only comprehend what happened on that fatal July morning, but also gain knowledge that might help you or someone you love avoid similar dangers. This isn't just a true crime story. It's a wake-up call about the deadly consequences when boundaries are crossed. Tyra Shanell Crosby was just 25 years old when her life was cut tragically short. Those who knew her described a young woman with an infectious smile and a gift for lifting other spirits. She always knew what to say, recalled one friend at her memorial service. If you were feeling down, she would make sure to lift it up. This natural ability to brighten rooms and hearts made her beloved in her circle. Born and raised in Charlotte, Tyra had developed a reputation as someone with a beautiful soul and loving nature. Her mother, Tanya Hoskins, spoke often of her daughter's capacity to touch lives and the boundless love she carried in her heart. While specific details about Tyra's early life remain limited in public records, the outpouring of grief following her death painted a picture of someone deeply connected to her community. What we know about Tyra's relationships remains somewhat mysterious. Friends described her as loyal and trusting, perhaps to a fault. Whether she knew Stephanie Alexander's husband before their arcade meeting remains unclear. What is certain is that Tyra was not known to be a homewrecker or someone who deliberately pursued married men, making the circumstances of her death all the more perplexing to those who knew her character and values. Stephanie Alexander, 51 at the time of the incident, lived what appeared to be a conventional life in Northwest Charlotte, a homeowner on Porter Street. She had built what seemed from the outside to be a stable marriage and home. Yet beneath this ordinary facade lay complexities that would eventually erupt in violence. Little public information exists about Stephanie's professional life or personal history before the crime. What emerged during legal proceedings, however, suggested a woman who valued her home and marriage enough to react with deadly force when she perceived them threatened. Court documents hinted at possible previous tensions in the marriage, though these were never fully explored in public record. The relationship between Stephanie and her husband contained fault lines invisible to neighbors and acquaintances. Her decision to plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter rather than face trial for second-degree murder suggested a complex emotional state, one that her legal team likely believed jurors might sympathize with despite the tragic outcome. During her sentencing, Stephanie expressed remorse to Tyra's family, a moment that revealed glimpses of a woman grappling with the devastating consequences of her actions. Whether her marriage had weathered previous infidelities remains speculation, but the extreme nature of her reaction suggests deep-seated issues that had festered beneath the surface. The third player in this tragic triangle remains the most enigmatic, Stephanie Alexander's husband, whose actions set the deadly chain of events in motion. Surveillance footage captured him with Tyra at an arcade on North Tryon Street hours before the shooting, suggesting a deliberate meeting rather than a chance encounter. Tyra's family firmly believed he had invited her to the Porter Street home, potentially under false pretenses about his marital status or living situation. His role became even more controversial during the court proceedings when he was involved in a physical confrontation with one of Tyra's relatives, requiring intervention from Mecklenburg County deputies. This outburst suggested a man unwilling to accept his part in the tragedy that unfolded. While he faced no criminal charges in connection with Tyra's death, questions linger about his moral culpability. Did he mislead Tyra? Did he know his wife might return home? These questions remain largely unanswered in the public record. Charlotte, North Carolina's largest city, provides the backdrop for this tragedy. Known for its banking industry and southern hospitality, the Queen City's northwest neighborhoods, like the one where the Alexanders lived, represent working and middle-class communities where violent crime, while not unheard of, still shocks residents and disrupts the sense of security many take for granted. The sequence of events that would end in tragedy began on the evening of July 17, 2023. Security cameras at an arcade on North Tryon Street captured footage that would later become crucial evidence. The grainy video showed Tyra Crosby and Stephanie Alexander's husband engaged in what appeared to be casual conversation, occasionally laughing and standing close to one another. Investigators would later determine they spent approximately 2 hours at the arcade, playing games and sharing drinks at the establishment's bar. Their body language, according to those who reviewed the footage, suggested familiarity rather than a first meeting. At several points, Stephanie's husband could be seen checking his phone. Tyra had been deliberately invited to the residence by Stephanie's husband. They firmly believed he had misrepresented his marital situation, possibly claiming to be single or separated, to lure the 25-year-old to his home. Cell phone records obtained during the investigation showed multiple text exchanges between Tyra and Stephanie's husband in the hours after they left the arcade. The content of these messages was never fully disclosed to the public, but prosecutors later referenced them as evidence that Tyra had been invited rather than entering uninvited. This distinction would become crucial in understanding the nature of the crime. What remains unclear is whether Tyra knew she was entering a married man's shared home.
Crosby's mom says she wants you to know what really happened to her daughter. She was killed Tuesday morning on Porter Street in Northwest Charlotte. CMPD says Stephanie Alexander arrived home, found Crosby inside, and then shot her. Alexander is charged with voluntary manslaughter. WBTV's Cam Gaskins is live outside CMPD tonight. So Cam, what did Crosby's mom tell you?
Yeah, Molly, she wanted us to know that her daughter Tyra Crosby was not an intruder in Alexander's home and was actually invited inside by Alexander's husband. And that's why she believes the charges deserve to be upgraded to first-degree murder. And that's why she wanted to make sure her daughter's story was shared tonight. It's all new at 11.
So I'm here, simply here, begging and pleading for justice for my child.
Thursday night, Tanya Hoskins wanted to make sure that her daughter, Tyra Crosby, was not forgotten and that her full story was shared.
She was our angel, our flower, murdered unnecessarily, lured to a home, and brutally beaten and murdered.
According to CMPD, Stephanie Alexander returned home to her house on Porter Street in Northwest Charlotte early Tuesday morning and found Crosby inside before shooting and killing her. Crosby's mother says that Tyra was invited into that home by Alexander's husband and that her daughter did not know he was married or that he and his wife owned that home.
She was invited there. She did not just pop up there. She was not an intruder. She was invited there.
She also says that Crosby called her in her final hour and left a voicemail in which you can hear Alexander beating her before shooting her. According to Hoskins, it was a prolonged beating, and she's hopeful that this new evidence will elevate the charges against Alexander.
Because right now she's charged with the lowest form of murder. I want it up to first-degree murder.
Alexander was charged with voluntary manslaughter and booked into the Mecklenburg County Jail on Tuesday. Hours later, she was out on bond.
She murdered my daughter at 5 a.m. and she was out at 8 p.m. So that means that human life means nothing anymore.
For now, Hoskins says she'll wait for CMPD to investigate, but she won't let anyone forget.
I don't want the investigators to go away. I won't stop until there's another charge and justice for my child.
So as we mentioned, Alexander was released on bond Tuesday night and is currently scheduled to appear in court next on August 7th, still facing that initial voluntary manslaughter charge. Reporting at CMPD headquarters, I'm Cam Gaskins, WBTV on your side.
Cam, thank you.
Friends who spoke anonymously to local reporters insisted that Tyra would never knowingly enter another woman's home to engage in an affair, that such behavior contradicted her character and values. The defense would later suggest that Tyra had been told the house belonged solely to Stephanie's husband, that he lived alone, and that she had no reason to believe she was entering a matrimonial home where a wife might return at any moment. Stephanie Alexander was not expected home that night, at least not by her husband. According to statements made during legal proceedings, she had been visiting her sister in Gastonia, approximately 30 minutes from Charlotte, and had originally planned to stay overnight. What prompted her to change these plans and return to Porter Street in the early morning hours of July 18th remains unclear. Some speculated that she might have received a tip about her husband's infidelity, while others suggested simple coincidence, a change of plans that would have devastating consequences. Stephanie arrived home at approximately 5 in the morning, a time when most of the neighborhood was still asleep. She used her key to enter quietly, perhaps hoping not to wake her husband if he was sleeping. The prosecution would later suggest that the timing of her arrival, the pre-dawn hours when the house was dark and quiet, contributed to the volatile situation that followed, creating an atmosphere of shock and confrontation. Have you ever ignored red flags in a relationship that later proved dangerous? As we continue exploring this tragic case, I want you to consider what warning signs might have been present. What signals should Tyra have recognized? What about Stephanie? Share your thoughts below. And let's discuss how recognizing these warnings could save lives. What happened in those fatal moments inside the Alexander home has been pieced together from physical evidence, Stephanie's statements, and the mysterious 8-minute voicemail that Tyra's mother claimed captured her daughter's final moments. According to the official timeline, Stephanie discovered Tyra and her husband in the master bedroom shortly after 5 a.m. The confrontation escalated rapidly. Stephanie, by her own admission in the 911 call, retrieved a handgun that was kept in the home. What began as a verbal altercation allegedly turned physical. The prosecution would later argue that Tyra had attempted to flee, based on evidence that she was partially dressed when shot. The fatal bullet struck Tyra in the upper torso. Medical examiners determined she died almost instantly. Stephanie remained at the scene and placed the 911 call herself, initially claiming she had shot an intruder in her home. When police arrived minutes later, they found Tyra's body and Stephanie waiting, the gun placed on a nearby table. Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department officers arrived at the Porter Street residence within minutes of Stephanie's 911 call. The scene they encountered was grim. Tyra Crosby's body lay on the bedroom floor, a single gunshot wound to her upper torso. Blood had pooled beneath her, and officers noted she was partially clothed, suggesting she may have been attempting to dress or flee when shot. Stephanie Alexander remained seated in the living room, appearing calm according to the responding officers' reports. Her husband was also present, described as visibly distressed in police documentation. Officers immediately secured the weapon, a registered 9mm handgun owned legally by the Alexanders, and separated the couple for initial questioning. Crime scene technicians worked methodically through the morning hours, photographing the scene, collecting bedding for DNA analysis, and documenting the trajectory of the bullet. The medical examiner arrived shortly before 7 a.m., pronouncing Tyra dead at the scene before her body was transported for autopsy. By mid-morning, Stephanie Alexander was in custody. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Tanya Hoskins, Tyra's mother, came forward with what would become the most controversial piece of evidence in the case, an 8-minute voicemail allegedly left accidentally on her phone during the confrontation. According to Hoskins, her daughter's phone had inadvertently dialed her number during the altercation, capturing the final moments of Tyra's life in harrowing audio. Hoskins described the recording as containing sounds of her daughter being beaten and tortured, with voices clearly threatening to kill her. "I heard my baby begging for her life," Hoskins told reporters outside the courthouse. The existence of this recording transformed public perception of the case from a heat of passion shooting to something potentially more sinister and premeditated. Forensic audio specialists worked to authenticate the recording and enhance its quality. While portions remained unintelligible, investigators could discern multiple voices and what appeared to be physical struggle. Most damning were statements allegedly made by Stephanie that contradicted her claim of shooting an unknown intruder. According to those who heard the recording, Stephanie could be heard addressing Tyra by name, suggesting she knew exactly who was in her home. The defense would later challenge the admissibility of the recording, questioning its chain of custody and whether it had been altered. Nevertheless, this piece of evidence proved pivotal in the prosecutor's decision to pursue elevated charges. Initially, Stephanie Alexander was charged with voluntary manslaughter, a charge reflecting the prosecution's early assessment that she had acted in the heat of passion upon discovering her husband's infidelity. She was held on a $200,000 bond while investigators continued gathering evidence. Tyra's family, led by her mother Tanya Hoskins, immediately pushed back against this charge, insisting it was insufficient given the circumstances. "My daughter was murdered in cold blood," Hoskins stated during a press conference 5 days after the shooting. This wasn't some accident or momentary rage. This was deliberate. The family's advocacy, combined with the voicemail evidence and forensic findings from the autopsy, ultimately persuaded the Mecklenburg County grand jury to indict Stephanie Alexander on the more serious charge of second-degree murder approximately 3 weeks after the incident. This elevated charge carried a potential sentence of up to 40 years in prison, significantly more than the maximum 10 years for voluntary manslaughter. The Charlotte community rallied around Tyra's family in the aftermath of her death. On July 23rd, just 5 days after the shooting, hundreds gathered at Camp Green Park for a candlelight vigil. Friends, family, and even strangers who had been moved by the case came together to honor Tyra's memory. Attendees wore custom T-shirts bearing Tyra's image and the phrase, "Justice for Tyra." Local community leaders spoke about the need for accountability and the importance of addressing domestic violence. A GoFundMe campaign quickly raised over $15,000 to help the family with funeral expenses and legal costs as they pursued justice for their loved one. The legal journey of Stephanie Alexander's case reflected the complexity beneath what initially appeared to be a straightforward crime of passion. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg District Attorney's Office originally filed voluntary manslaughter charges, a decision based on preliminary evidence suggesting Stephanie had acted in the heat of passion upon discovering her husband's infidelity. However, as investigators uncovered more evidence, particularly the voicemail recording and forensic findings, the prosecution's perspective shifted dramatically. On August 8, 2023, the Mecklenburg County grand jury returned an indictment for second-degree murder, elevating the case to a far more serious charge carrying significantly heavier penalties. This evolution reflected the prosecution's growing belief that Stephanie's actions contained elements of malice and exceeded reasonable response to provocation. Criminal defense attorney Mark Jedden, though not directly involved in the case, noted to local media that this upgrade suggested prosecutors had found evidence of depraved heart behavior, actions showing reckless disregard for human life, rather than merely emotional response. The prosecution built their case around several key pieces of evidence. The 8-minute voicemail remained central, with audio experts testifying to its authenticity and content. Forensic analysis of the bedroom revealed blood spatter patterns inconsistent with Stephanie's initial claim of shooting in self-defense, suggesting instead that Tyra had been attempting to retreat when shot. The medical examiner's testimony proved particularly damaging to the defense, as it established that the bullet's trajectory indicated Tyra had been turning away from, not advancing toward, Stephanie. Cell phone records demonstrated that Stephanie's husband had explicitly invited Tyra to the home, undermining the intruder narrative. Perhaps most compelling was testimony from a neighbor who reported hearing a woman's voice shouting, "You knew exactly what you were doing coming here," followed by sounds of physical struggle approximately 20 minutes before the gunshot. This timeline contradicted Stephanie's claim of discovering Tyra and immediately shooting in shock and anger. Tension between the families erupted during a pre-trial hearing in November 2023. As Stephanie was being escorted from the courtroom, her husband made a comment that was overheard by Tyra's cousin. What exactly was said remains disputed, but the resulting confrontation required immediate intervention from Mecklenburg County deputies. The altercation resulted in the judge issuing a stern warning about courtroom decorum and implementing stricter security measures for subsequent hearings. Separate entrances and seating areas were designated for each family, with additional officers present to prevent further incidents. This charged atmosphere reflected the raw emotions still simmering nearly 4 months after Tyra's death. In a surprising development on December 5, 2024, nearly 17 months after the shooting, Stephanie Alexander accepted a plea deal, admitting guilt to involuntary manslaughter rather than facing trial for second-degree murder. The agreement came after months of negotiations between prosecutors and Alexander's defense team. During the emotional sentencing hearing, Stephanie stood before Judge Robert Bell and expressed remorse directly to Tyra's family. "I never intended for anyone to die that night," she stated, her voice barely audible in the packed courtroom. "I know nothing I can say will bring Tyra back or ease your pain." Tyra's mother, Tanya Hoskins, delivered a powerful victim impact statement, describing the devastating hole left in her life by her daughter's absence. "You didn't just take her life," Hoskins said, looking directly at Stephanie. "You took our future, the grandchildren I'll never hold, the holidays we'll never share." Judge Bell sentenced Stephanie to 60 to 84 months in prison, 5 to 7 years, a decision that drew mixed reactions. Prosecutors defended the plea agreement as ensuring definite prison time while sparing both families the trauma of a trial. Tyra's family expressed disappointment at what they perceived as leniency, while legal experts noted the sentence fell within typical ranges for involuntary manslaughter cases involving no prior criminal history. The Alexander case highlights the legal gray area between crimes of passion and premeditated acts. The heat of passion defense, which might have reduced Stephanie's culpability had she gone to trial, requires that the defendant acted in an immediate emotional response, without time for reflection. This defense acknowledges human frailty in moments of extreme emotional distress. However, several elements of this case challenged that narrative. The 8-minute voicemail suggested a prolonged confrontation rather than an instantaneous reaction. Forensic evidence indicating Tyra was shot while attempting to flee further undermined the heat of passion claim. Most significantly, the time between discovery and shooting, estimated at 15 to 20 minutes, provided what prosecutors called a cooling period during which rational thought could have prevailed. The evolution of charges from voluntary manslaughter to second-degree murder reflected this assessment, that Stephanie's actions, while perhaps initially triggered by emotional shock, crossed into territory where malice aforethought could be reasonably inferred by a jury. Criminal defense attorneys who analyzed the case pointed to several factors that likely influenced the eventual plea agreement. Former prosecutor Melissa Owen noted that the case presented challenges for both sides. The defense had to contend with damning physical evidence and the voicemail recording, she explained. But the prosecution faced the reality that juries can be sympathetic to betrayed spouses, particularly when the deceased was found in their home. The plea to involuntary manslaughter represented what legal experts call a compromise verdict, without the uncertainty of trial. Defense attorney James Exum suggested the agreement reflected the prosecution's concern about proving malice beyond reasonable doubt. Second-degree murder requires proving malice, an inherently subjective standard, he observed. Involuntary manslaughter acknowledges criminal negligence and recklessness without requiring proof of malicious intent. Most experts agreed the 60 to 84-month sentence aligned with typical outcomes for similar cases, particularly for defendants like Stephanie with no prior criminal history. Forensic psychologist Dr. Amelia Richardson, who studies domestic homicides, explained that crimes like Stephanie's often stem from a complex interplay of factors beyond simple jealousy. What we often see is an underlying sense of humiliation and loss of control, she noted. The discovery of infidelity in one's own home represents a profound violation of personal boundaries and identity. This violation triggers what psychologists call acute stress response, flooding the brain with stress hormones that impair rational thinking. However, Dr. Richardson emphasized that this biological response typically peaks within minutes. The extended timeline in this case suggests other psychological processes were at work, possibly rumination, catastrophic thinking, or even dissociation. Most revealing, according to Dr. Richardson, was Stephanie's decision to retrieve the gun rather than immediately confront or flee. This represents a critical moment where impulse could have been checked by rational thought. The choice to arm oneself introduces an element of deliberation that complicates the pure crime of passion narrative. The Tyra Crosby case reflects disturbing patterns in domestic homicides. According to the Violence Policy Center, nearly 1,600 women were murdered by men in 2021, with 90% knowing their killer and 62% being wives, ex-wives, or girlfriends of their murderers. While statistics specifically tracking infidelity homicides remain limited, research from the Journal of Forensic Sciences indicates that approximately 12% of domestic homicides involve sexual jealousy as a primary motive. Women are 3 times more likely to be killed in such scenarios than men. Perhaps most relevant to this case, the FBI's supplementary homicide reports show that crimes involving discovery of infidelity carry unique patterns. They typically occur in the home, involve legally owned firearms, and are committed by individuals with no prior criminal record. These statistics paint a sobering picture of how ordinary people can commit extraordinary violence when confronted with relationship betrayal, a pattern that makes prevention particularly challenging for law enforcement and domestic violence advocates. The tragic death of Tyra Crosby reminds us how quickly passion can turn deadly. A young woman's life ended, a wife now serves prison time, and families on both sides are forever changed. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about infidelity, betrayal, and the thin line between emotional reaction and criminal action. If this story impacted you, please hit the like button and subscribe to Explosive True Crime Stories for more cases that matter. Share this video to spread awareness about relationship safety. What would you have done in Stephanie's position? Comment below and join our community dedicated to understanding and preventing these tragedies.